You know, when you picture a high-stakes negotiation, there's usually this very specific, like almost universal atmosphere.
Right, like a tense boardroom.
Yeah, exactly. You picture the boardroom, the long table, the tense silence. Both sides are just exhausted.
Because they've been going back and forth for weeks.
Right, and they're just waiting to see who's going to crack first. It's a really slow grind.
It becomes way less about finding a solution and, more about seeing who has the higher tolerance for pain.
Yeah, but then imagine a scenario where one side has completely, utterly run out of patience.
They don't even pack up their briefcases and walk away.
No, they stand up and play a final, devastating move. Something so absolute, so uncompromising, that it shatters the illusion that this was ever a negotiation between equals.
And it changes the lives of two entire nations overnight.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Whether you're brushing up on ancient literature or you just love a masterclass in narrative tension, this deep dive is for you.
Today, we're unpacking a short but incredibly dense ancient text.
Right, the climax to one of history's most famous power struggles. We are looking at the final ultimatum given to Pharaoh by Moses, speaking directly on behalf of the Lord.
And what makes this climax so compelling is we aren't just looking at the final blow itself. To really understand the sheer weight of this moment.
You have to look at the setup.
Yes, exactly. The preparations that happen just before that ultimatum is delivered. There is this quiet, almost counterintuitive dismantling of the enemy's power structure that totally sets the stage for the destruction to come.
I noticed that immediately in the source material. Like before any threat is even delivered to Pharaoh, the Lord makes this fascinating opening statement to Moses.
Right, there is a promise of one final plague.
Yeah, but the focus is on the aftermath. The text says that after this event, Pharaoh won't just let the Israelites go. He will, quote, surely thrust you out, hence altogether.
Which is a huge shift.
It really is. Up until this point, the entire conflict has been driven by Pharaoh's desperate clinging to his enslaved workforce. And now we're told to expect a violent, complete reversal.
It's the difference between, finally unlocking a door for someone
and literally shoving them out into the street and deadbolting it behind them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That phrase, thrust you out, hence altogether, implies a complete collapse of Egypt's economic and social paradigm.
Because Pharaoh's power rests entirely on his ability to control this population.
Right. So predicting that he will actively expel them means predicting a total psychological break.
Yeah.
But the narrative doesn't just stop at predicting the expulsion.
No, it introduces a highly unusual instruction for the Israelites to carry out in the meantime. And this is the part that genuinely made me pause.
Borrowing instructions.
Yes. The text instructs Moses to speak in the ears of the people and let every man borrow of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor jewels of silver and jewels of gold.
It outlines a massive grassroots economic transfer. Notice that Moses isn't instructed to go to the Egyptian treasury and, demand state reparations.
Right. The instruction is for neighbor to go to neighbor, house to house. But I really have to push back on this translation, or at least the concept of the word borrow.
How so?
Well, if the Israelites are about to be permanently, violently thrust out of the country, how in the world is this borrowing?
That's a fair point.
Right. I mean, you do not borrow your neighbor's fine silver if you know for a fact you're crossing the border tomorrow and never coming back.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense on a practical level.
It's like a fed-up employee who's finally quitting a deeply toxic job, but before they walk out of the building for the last time.
They go into the boss's office?
Yes. They walk in, ask for the company's expensive art off the walls, and the boss just packs it up in a box and hands it over. It defies basic human logic. Why would the Egyptian citizens willingly give away their wealth to people they have historically subjugated?
Well, the absurdity of the situation is exactly the point. The text gives us the underlying mechanism for why this works, noting that the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians.
So it's framed as a supernatural psychological shift.
Exactly. The animosity, the prejudice, or the assumed superiority that the Egyptians held is suddenly overridden by this inexplicable favor. It just totally strips away their resistance.
And this favor isn't just a general feeling of goodwill among the commoners either. The text takes a moment to specifically elevate Moses' social status.
Right. It points out that Moses was considered very great in the land of Egypt.
And it specifies who reveres him, which I found fascinating. Pharaoh's servants, which means the political elite, the cabinet members, and the general public.
That detail is vital for understanding the political landscape at this exact moment. Think about Moses' character arc here.
He started as a fugitive.
Right, a fugitive hiding in the desert, an outcast returning to speak for an enslaved people. Now, right before the climax, the text establishes him as a looming, respected giant within the empire itself.
And the glaring omission in that list of people who respect him is Pharaoh.
Exactly. The political elite respect Moses. The citizens respect Moses. Pharaoh is entirely isolated at the top.
This psychological dismantling of the country is just brilliant narrative pacing. You have this quiet, neighborhood-level exchange of gold and silver.
And this profound social respect building around Moses.
Yeah, it feels almost peaceful. But that quiet granting of favor stands in terrifying contrast to the actual threat Moses is about to deliver to that isolated ruler at the very top of the hierarchy.
The contrast is jarring. The narrative pivots from this surreal daytime wealth, transfer directly into an ultimate declaration of destruction.
Moses enters Pharaoh's presence, and the message he brings is absolute. The delivery is so visceral.
Right.
Moses warns Pharaoh, saying, "Thus saith the Lord, about midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt."
Night. It is the time of maximum human vulnerability. People are asleep in their beds.
And the consequence laid out is that all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die.
In the ancient world, the firstborn was everything. The firstborn inherited the estate, the lineage, and the spiritual authority of the family. To strike the firstborn is to strike the future of the nation itself.
It's a complete erasure.
Yes. But the text is very deliberate in detailing the scope of this event. It paints a vertical cross-section of the entire Egyptian empire.
Right. It ranges from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon his throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill.
And all the firstborn of beasts.
Yeah. Even the livestock. It sweeps from the absolute pinnacle of human power down to the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder.
By explicitly including the maidservant and even the livestock, the text emphasizes that there is no geographical, social, or biological loophole.
No one is safe.
Exactly. The decree penetrates every single layer of existence. No one is insulated by their wealth or proximity to the throne, and no one is overlooked because of their poverty.
Wow.
In Egyptian theology, the concept of ma'at represents cosmic order and balance. This threat is a promise to completely obliterate that order.
The auditory description of this impending doom is haunting, too. The text predicts, quote, "And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall be like it anymore."
It's a level of national grief that's almost impossible to comprehend.
You can just imagine the wailing starting in one house and the next, just rolling street by street across the entire country in the dark.
It's a terrifying image.
But as I was reading this section, expecting descriptions of chaos everywhere, the narrative suddenly cuts to the Israelite camp.
And introduces a completely different sensory experience.
Yeah, it's eerie. Amidst this promise of unprecedented nationwide wailing, the text says, "But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue, against man or beast."
Which is such a vivid detail.
Right. You have this chaotic, deafening grief of an entire empire on one side, and then snap, the narrative shifts to the Israelite neighborhood, and it is so unnaturally, impossibly peaceful that even the guard dogs are frozen.
They don't bark, they don't growl.
Yeah, it perfectly illustrates the text's claim that the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel.
It is a complete suspension of the natural order. Dogs bark at intruders. Dogs react to ambient chaos and human panic.
Right, they feed off that energy.
Exactly. For the dogs to remain completely silent while an invisible, devastating entity passes through the land underscores the terrifying surgical precision of the event.
So it's not just a random plague.
No, this is not a chaotic plague or a natural disaster that indiscriminately destroys everything in its path. It is a highly controlled execution of divine power.
And Moses knows the weight of this. He knows he holds every single card. After delivering this midnight ultimatum, he looks at Pharaoh and declares that all of Pharaoh's servants, the very people who already think Moses is very great, are going to physically come down, bow to him, and beg him to leave.
And then the text notes, "And he went out from Pharaoh in a great anger."
That stuck out to me. Moses guarantees his enemies' destruction, promises they will beg him to leave, and walks out. But he walks out furious.
His anger reveals the human core of this narrative. Moses has just declared absolute victory. He has guaranteed his people's freedom.
So why is he mad?
Because the impending doom is entirely unnecessary from a human perspective. Pharaoh has been given every opportunity to yield.
Which brings up the obvious question for anyone analyzing this story. Moses has laid out a horror so complete, so unavoidable, that any rational human being,
let alone a leader responsible for an entire nation.
right, any leader would surrender to save their people. Why let it get to the midnight cry? Why not just stop it right there?
Well, the source text gives us a deeply complex, incredibly provocative answer to that exact question.
It really does.
It forces us to look beneath the surface conflict and examine the underlying mechanics of ancient theology.
Yeah, moving into the final paragraphs of the source, the explanation for Pharaoh's refusal really makes you pause. The Lord explicitly tells Moses that Pharaoh will not hearken. He will not listen to him.
The stated reason for Pharaoh's stubbornness changes the entire nature of the text.
It says Pharaoh will not listen, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt.
And it spells it out even more clearly right after that.
Yeah, it says Moses and Aaron did all these wonders, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the children of Israel go out of his land.
This is a huge theological pivot.
I have to unpack the philosophical friction here, because if the Lord is actively hardening Pharaoh's heart, is Pharaoh actually making a choice?
That is the million-dollar question.
It feels like a chess master who is playing an opponent, and the master is so far ahead that the opponent is completely beaten. The opponent is literally reaching out to tip their king over to surrender.
But the master steps in.
Exactly. The master reaches across the table, stops their hand, and starts physically moving the opponent's pieces for them, just to artificially prolong the game and show off an even more spectacular checkmate.
The chess master analogy gets right to the heart of ancient power dynamics.
It just feels so manipulative.
To understand why the narrative is framed this way, we have to look at how ancient audiences viewed pantheons and divine power. In the ancient world, Pharaoh wasn't just a political king.
He was a god.
Right, he was considered a literal god on earth, the living embodiment of Horus. So by actively puppeteering Pharaoh's decisions, the narrative isn't just about freeing slaves.
It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. It is systematically proving that Egypt's living God is entirely subordinate to the Israelite God.
So it isn't Moses versus Pharaoh. It isn't even the Israelite God versus Pharaoh.
No, it is a unilateral demonstration of supreme authority. The text is establishing that the antagonist's resistance isn't an obstacle.
It's a tool.
Exactly, it's a tool.
Yeah.
Pharaoh's stubbornness, his pride, his repeated refusals, they are entirely co-opted to serve the protagonist's ultimate demonstration of power.
Wow.
A newly emerging nation, like the Israelites at this moment in the text, needs an undeniable, foundation-building narrative of supremacy over the greatest empire on earth.
So Pharaoh's forced no is engineered so that the Lord can deliver a louder, more terrifying yes.
Sure.
Exactly. But when you apply that high-level theological concept to the people on the ground, it is incredibly dark.
It is very dark.
Think about the maidservant behind the mill. She loses her firstborn because Pharaoh's heart was artificially hardened so that the wonders may be multiplied.
The collateral damage.
The human cost of this divine theater is staggering. It makes the collateral damage of this narrative feel so much heavier, and it raises deeply uncomfortable questions about free will.
It suggests that, in the worldview of this text, human free will is a localized illusion.
An illusion?
Yeah. The illusion of choice might exist for the individuals experiencing the plagues, but at the highest level of cosmic architecture, there is only one will operating.
Right.
Pharaoh thinks he is resisting, he believes he is exercising his sovereign authority, but his resistance is the very vehicle through which he is defeated.
That is just so heavy. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Like, why should we spend time analyzing the exact phrasing of an ancient mythological showdown?
Because reading these ancient sources isn't just about learning the sequence of historical or literary events. It is about observing how early human civilizations wrestled with massive, timeless concepts.
It is about how humanity has historically viewed the terrifying scale of conflicts.
And the crushing weight of absolute power.
Right, and that deeply uncomfortable idea we just discussed, the feeling of being trapped in a predetermined destiny where your choices don't actually matter.
These texts were trying to make sense of cosmic forces and societal collapses that felt completely beyond human control.
They really give us a framework for that.
They provide a vital window into the psychology of power. We see how ancient cultures understood justice, vengeance, and the necessity of totally dismantling an oppressor's worldview before physically escaping their grasp.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over on your own.
A little homework for the listener.
Exactly. Something that builds on everything we have just discussed, but brings it right back down to a deeply physical human level. Let's connect the beginning of our source to the end.
Looking back at the initial transfer of wealth.
Yes. Think about those jewels of silver and gold. The text said the Egyptians handed them over out of favor.
Right, it was a quiet daytime exchange.
The Egyptians looked at their Israelite neighbors, packed up their family wealth, and freely handed it across the threshold.
A peaceful subversion of the economic order.
But within mere hours of that quiet exchange, that exact same nation, those exact same neighbors, suffered an unprecedented great cry of unimaginable loss.
The midnight execution of the firstborn.
Yeah. So picture the Israelites as they are finally marching out of Egypt. They have won. The power structure is broken.
But they are physically wearing, or carrying, the heavy silver and gold they just acquired.
From the people who are now screaming in the dark behind them.
Oh, wow. The physical weight of the plunder becomes intertwined with the tragedy.
How does that physical wealth carry the invisible heavy taint of the grief and devastation left behind? Every single borrowed jewel, every silver bracelet or gold necklace bouncing against their chests as they walk into the desert.
Instantly becomes a permanent physical artifact of that terrible midnight.
Exactly. You walk into the boardroom, you pull the devastating final move, you completely break your opponent.
But when you walk out with the prize, you still have to carry the weight of how you won it.
Such a powerful image to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.